Today in our podcast, we're going to be talking about healthcare, and in particular around a topic that's revenue cycle management and the payment integrity space. And given everything is AI at the moment, we want to really talk about how AI is transforming that space from a technology perspective, right? And at Symphony, we've been doing a lot of work that's been AI related in this space, and a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is really around kind of how we innovate around process automation and effectively increasing the efficiency of these processes in the space, right? And so to talk about all this today, I want to welcome Jenny Karuna, who's a leading technologist in the space. She's been working in RCM and payments integrity for a long time in some of the leading companies in the space. So we're going to learn all about this with her. Welcome, Jenny. And maybe I'll hand over to you just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, thanks again for having me here, Daniel. I'm excited for this conversation. For the listeners, I'm Jenny Karuna. Nice to be here. I'm Chief Product Officer, healthcare tech nerd. I've been in the payment integrity and revenue cycle spaces for long, building products here. I've become a champion of AI in revenue cycle and revenue integrity spaces as the space has been evolving and rapidly moving. I'm kind of obsessed with healthcare data, obsessed with bringing structure to the really vast amount of unstructured data here and getting things done with the structure that we derive out of that unstructured data. Revenue cycle management is essentially all the things that a hospital system or a healthcare provider has to do to get money paid for the services that they provide. That's all the things. There's a lot that goes on with getting the money for the services that they provide. And then payment integrity is the payer side ensuring that they are being correct with every dollar that they're paying out, that they are owing every dollar that they're paying out, and they're not paying any more than what they owe. To simplify it for people that are not familiar with the healthcare space, let's take a restaurant analogy. I'm going to eat a meal in a restaurant, except I'm not paying for it with my credit card, and insurance company is paying for my meal. So really, revenue cycle is all the scheduling or the appointment or the reservation information that the restaurant has to keep, and then they have to make sure that they are billing me correctly, or they are correctly telling the insurance company that this is what Jenny ate, these are the things that we provided, this is the tip, this is how that event was, and this is what you owe us, and then following up really for when the payment is late, or when the insurance company says, no, you're incorrect, I'm not going to pay you, then all of the following up and then getting the money in the bank, right? There's a lot that happens in this process. And then if you take the flip side of that same scenario for the insurance company, their job really is to ensure that the dollar amount on the bill and the dollar amount on the menu for the item are the same, right? Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes the numbers get jumbled, that I actually ate all those things that are on the bill. They're essentially validating the accuracy and the correctness of the bill. And they're saying, you billed us this much, but we're going to pay you this much because these are the things that are correct in the bill and there are some things that are wrong in the bill. That's payment integrity.
To get us started, you want to share a little bit kind of what have been kind of the hardest problems you've been solving from a product perspective working for players in this space? Because I think it will obviously kind of help us then make the transition to what AI can do and help in that context.
That's a pretty loaded question, right? It's a lot. There's a lot that is challenging in this space. And depending on who you ask, if you're asking somebody that is more aligned to the provider side, or if you're asking somebody that's more aligned to the payer side, you'll get very different responses. But because I have this experience of working on both sides, I think my perspective is a little bit elevated compared to what a provider side would say is a problem or a payer side would say is a problem. What I'm describing are things that are systemic problems, right? So the number one systemic problem, and nobody will fight me on this, nobody will, push back on this, is data interoperability. We spend days and nights thinking about getting data to the right party, getting good quality data from the right party to do each step of this operation. And this becomes even more of a challenge because there are so many parties involved in this process. That's why I said earlier, tech can also cause some of these issues, is because not one party is managing this process end to end for either side. There's a lot of parties involved. There's hospitals involved, there's healthcare vendors involved, there's clearinghouses involved, and the file formats are very, very varied. Any single entity in this process has only a view of what is one step left to them, what is one step right to them, and their step, right? And if you take these, a dozen steps, nobody has a full view of what happened. So this data interoperability, getting the full picture is a huge challenge. And also because it is so pervasive, it also is the biggest opportunity, in my opinion. I always get driven towards fixing the data problems. For any problems that you throw at me for healthcare revenue cycle or payment integrity, I try to go all the way to the data and see if we can solve it with better quality data, because you're solving it in mass versus, you're solving one claim at a time downstream. And the second part is also related to what I said. The second problem is related to what I said earlier, is that there's no visibility, right? There's no transparency in this process. And because of that, nobody trusts anybody. So that to me is a bigger problem, is that there's so much complexity in the system because of this lack of trust, right? How do we know that this DRG is correct? What determined this DRG, right? DRG could have been determined by a human. It could have been determined by an autonomous coding system, but the payer wants to know why. There is no narrative around why a particular DRG was chosen by a human or the system. And that narrative is a narrative layered on top of the general adversarial model of, payers versus providers. We're enemies, that type of adversarial model. You layer that lack of transparency, and you have to add a lot on top of it to validate the DRG first, right? Rather than trusting that the DRG was correct. So this lack of trust really leads to a lot of additional processes, additional handoffs, additional requests for information, and it's really wasteful, in my opinion.
And so maybe just shifting gears a little bit and moving towards the AI angle that we said we would cover. And if you look at like the last 12 months or so, and you think about those two areas, how have you seen things change, and how have you yourself changed your product thinking in this space, given the latest advances in AI and generative AI coming to kind of the forefront of?
It's been quite a journey. It's been such a wild journey the last couple of years. It started off with, can this really do what it's saying it can do, what it's claiming to do? We went from that end of the spectrum very quickly to everything is going to be solved by generative AI, right? This is the magic bullet that we've been waiting for. And then, you have this really powerful hammer and everything looks like a nail. So I've also been part of exercises where we just go searching for nails, right? Hey, what can Gen AI solve? It's really solution looking for a problem, right? So I've been through that part of the journey. I think now we have really settled. I feel a little bit more settled in terms of how technology leaders think about AI in the space. And I think it has kind of collided with like that experience of swinging from one end of the spectrum to the other, finding the middle, etc. And also at the same time, this agentic frameworks evolving. Right now, we know that there is a framework that can determine what tools to call for what specific problems. It's not one tool for everything, because there is this agentic framework is an orchestrator, right? It can say that, okay, these I'm looking at this claim. This needs 10 steps. For this, I'm going to call actually a predictive model. This doesn't require generative stuff, right? This just requires a classification or a scoring. But this step requires a letter to be drafted. I'll call it generative AI. This step does not require anything really, right? It does not require an AI tool. It's just a step that a QA person has to like validate it, or a nurse has to sign it. So we've become more mature in not thinking about generative AI as a magic bullet, to like thinking of it as like looking for appropriate and accurate application of tools of different technologies for different use cases. I think we've matured quite a bit, and it's fun to be here now. Everybody is kind of speaking the same language with agentic, and it's fun to be here because we are kind of understanding each other, and we're all thinking kind of similarly about what this agentic framework means and how to use different types of AI to different use cases.
Yeah, I was about to say it's interesting because I think it echoes quite a lot of what we see in the work we do kind of day to day at Symphony, right? I think to some extent it all started with exactly like, can we put LLMs somewhere, right? And I think it was very kind of pointed POCs, but without necessarily that kind of across process perspective, right? And orchestration. And I think what's happening now is exactly what you're saying, is like we're seeing these more like end-to-end rethinks of the process. And I think there was a wave of that a few years back with RPA, right? And I think now we're rethinking that. And actually, as we're rethinking that with kind of LLM orchestrators in there, I think a lot of our clients are also thinking back to like, well, actually, can I add some more traditional automation in that process? Because maybe now is the right time to do that, right? So I was about to ask you, like, do you feel it's a little bit different this time? Because it feels like we've had like many ways of automation over the last 10 years, right? And I'm curious, like, what makes it different now? Is it this orchestration layer that's really changing the game?
The clarity that we all have in terms of the languages are also evolving, right? The terminologies for these technologies is also evolving. And so there is now a common understanding of, what this orchestration layer is expected to do versus each tool. And there could be similar underlying models at the orchestration layer. Orchestration layers typically have an underlying LLM model, but there could be another LLM model under that orchestration layer that's doing one step of the task. But it's important to understand that not underestimate the power of predictive AI, right? So that was happening for a little bit, that we were kind of like forgetting those really good machine learning models. And, there was a lot of just interest and investments happening in generative. But now, we also have to be balanced in investments in generative versus predictive technologies, because predictive technologies are very good. And with better data, better context, they can be even better than they used to be. Yeah. But in summary, it's that orchestration layer.
Yeah, and it feels like, I think it's interesting what you're saying around the predictive versus the generative. I think like at least what we're observing is it depends a little bit also on where the value lies for specific players in the value chain, right? If your main goal is like clearing a lot of claims very quickly, then the generative AI can help in that process of just going through a lot faster. But then if you're like a subrogation player and you're actually trying to recover more, then the predictive might actually be more impactful than just having generative everywhere, right? And so I think it depends a little bit on the archetype of player and where in the value chain they sit, right? In terms of where the value lies.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep, that's a good example.
In terms of kind of scaling this, and actually, I think we're seeing, everyone putting some AIs everywhere, right? But I think like the question is like, what are some of the challenges that remain to actually really get this to production scale, to actually have it beyond POCs for players in the RCM and payment integrity space? Are kind of the building blocks in terms of tech stack, organizational setup, etc., there already? Or is it something that needs to be tackled by the industry before we scale AI in the space?
I think the first barrier is not technical, it's more the mindset, right? You see all sorts of perspectives about AI across the spectrum. The part that is a bigger challenge is, yeah, there's going to be skeptics. There are people that are going to be wary, apprehensive about this. They are going to think that it's not going to work or going to make mistakes. That's always there. People who are afraid of the technology, skeptical, that's always going to be there. But even with people that are really big proponents of this technology, who believe in AI in general, they don't get, they are still very not as aggressive as they could be in how fast or how much AI can do. So I would say that mindset is the what I'm seeing essentially is a lot of people stuck in these types of pilot cycles. We do a pilot, AI works. Let's do a pilot, and then they don't scale it. They get stuck with scaling, and the pilots are usually successful. Some pilots don't work, but the models are so powerful, right, Daniel, that you cannot go wrong with simple use cases because the models are so good right now. So the pilots end up becoming successful, and then they get stuck with scaling because they are not thinking about, or in the pilot they did not account for the integration challenges, or they're not also asking for that pilot to be more than it is. They are happy with that success, and then they say that this is how far it can go, right? That is a mindset problem, really not a technical roadblock or a limitation in infra. Obviously, we've talked enough about how data is so difficult in this space, and how old some systems are. Everything runs in batch. Everything is 25 years or older. With what we're dealing with. So those kind of, architectural challenges exist, but we don't even go try to push the edge of what is available within the architectural frameworks that are working, right? So that I would say is the biggest roadblock, is people wanting a lot more out of this technology, or people believing that it's capable of more and pushing for that more, and then hitting those edges of architectural challenges. That is what I would say is the first thing to cross. And then with people that are innovating very rapidly, they'll keep hitting those edges of technical complexity or technical limitation. And for that, the way to resolve those is, one thing at a time, one data set at a time. Get it clean, get it sorted, and then feed it into the system, and then go work on the next data set. We've been doing this, but for different sets. We've been doing this data cleaning, data acquisition, and rationalization for just workflow systems, right? We've needed data, and we know how to work on the data part. It has to be one step at a time. Unless something, a disruptor comes in and, builds a healthcare exchange, data exchange platform. Because really, that is what we need. But until then, we go after one data set at a time. We're diligent in that. We're disciplined in that. But the first thing is you need to think wild about AI, because the models are pretty wild. You also brought up compliance earlier. I missed that. That's actually also a big barrier here. Is not that AI is going to get a company in trouble, but that perception that we're going to break something and we're going to be in big trouble, right? So there is that perception. So the way to go approach that is just establish an AI governance framework. It's hard to innovate when you don't have any boundaries and when you're afraid that you could break something big. So that governance framework is really your sandbox, right? And your boundary within which you can go break things. People associate healthcare with life or death. Revenue cycle and payment integrity are not life or death, not at all life or death decisions, right? So those boundaries could be pretty big, but within those bounds, you can go break things. So the teams need that environment where they can go break things. And the organization also needs to know that they're not going to go outside of those bounds. So that establishing of governance frameworks and then education of everyone, educating everyone on what that is, what lack of compliance would look like. Those definitions, lack of definitions is very scary, right? So once you define it and everybody has clarity on what right is, what wrong would look like, etc., then there is a little bit openness to that innovation. So that's a big part of the change. And honestly, humans break things all the time, right? Humans are terrible with like following processes or repeating the same, workflows, etc. But there is less tolerance in the average person's mindset for an AI model making a mistake than a human making a mistake, because obviously there is that perception that AI cannot be controlled, or it can go off the rails without a human in loop, etc. So those perceptions can obviously, be managed by having a good governance framework. And back to your basic or your question of fundamentally, how is this shaping the talent pool, and the skill sets, and all of those? This could have gone two ways, right? And a year ago, I would have answered this question differently. A year ago, I would have thought that the lines are going to blur between an engineer and a product person and a designer and a tester, that these four people are going to become now two people or one person that does everything. There is still some edge cases where that might apply, that might happen. But broadly, I think what is practically a better suited skill set change is all of these disciplines independently becoming very, very good at employing their own, developing their own assistants or interns, or whatever you want to call it. They're essentially a duplicate of themselves, right? A twin, their own digital twin, and putting that twin to work, right? And so for that to actually be effective, the engineer has to be very, very good at putting different parts of the code together, because it can be good at creating code, but can also create repetition, duplication, etc. in the code. It can create a lot of tech debt, right? And a product person, LLMs can be very good at synthesizing a user interview or writing a document, but this product person has to, even more than before, they have to have a better product sense. They need to know what to ask the LLM to do. That means they have to be very, very, very good at that product sense, what good product looks like, what they have to have that taste that has to be even more than before, because an LLM with confidence can lead you into a very bad solution, right? And it does so with confidence that if you do not have confidence in your own product sense, you would go in a completely wrong direction. So my take for how this is shaping people is you have to become these people that we're looking at as, the best people to have in a company. They have to be very good at building their sidekicks, and they have to be very good at putting those sidekicks to work and getting the most out of those sidekicks, which means they have to elevate their own ability to write good code or come up with good product designs or come up with good user designs. I think that's what is happening. But this blending of roles also could happen, and it is happening in some places where there are some companies that are changing their UX designer profiles into UX engineer profiles, because UI code, LLMs are very good at front-end code, right? So just a designer will be able to take it all the way to front-end code. So that is some amount of that blending.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it echoes also what we see. I think, for instance, in all of the modernization work we do, I think we're obviously embedding, LLMs to help us do that modernization faster, right? Whether that's like migrating small procedures or things like that. And at the end of the day, we see that obviously we save a lot of time and there's a lot of efficiency out of that, but we need really the best people to drive that process and make sure that like it's all within whatever modernization roadmap we have in mind, and it's actually done, in the right way. And so I think the profile remains kind of critical, and you need your best people actually to run those, right? It's not like you don't like throw away the key after like launching the the LLM, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Maybe to kind of close our conversation, I want to loop back to kind of what you said at the beginning around where the opportunity and the challenges are. As I think you talked about two things. One was like the transparency and visibility of the process, and kind of the link between the different players in the chain. And then the second one was data, right? And so maybe if we start with the first one, I'm curious, obviously, what we start seeing, and I think it was already the case with the first wave of automation, we see more and more of kind of a claim being pinged between a provider and a payer, and kind of going back and forth with all the intermediaries in the middle, right? And AI is doing all that work, right? So, how does that going to move, right? Are we going to see more collaboration? Is technology and AI going to help foster more collaboration there, or are we kind of doomed for a world where it's just AI talking to each other and kind of ping-ponging these claims around and kind of making decisions on their own?
This is very funny, right? And, I think about it and I laugh. And this is what I was thinking about. We always ponder about how LLMs are affecting us. And I've been that person that was excited about using Copilot to write my emails, right? A really well-drafted email, send it to somebody. What are they doing with that well-drafted, thoughtful email? They're using a Copilot to synthesize it, and they're reducing it to a line, which I would have written, right? So what is the point of this dance that we're doing from, between parties that are using Copilots to expand on something and then shrink it down, etc.? So, and what's happening in revenue cycle and payment integrity is not very different. We're just using AI to mimic humans right now, right? Somebody used to write a denial letter and send it over to the hospital. Somebody used to read that denial letter and write an appeal letter if they don't agree with it. They go find the evidence for why we should appeal this, why they may have missed something in the review process before denying, and they write an appeal letter. These letters they can be pretty long. And right, so we are essentially mimicking this process that was designed for human interaction, and we are trying to make machines do the same thing. But it's pretty pointless if you ask me for 2 letters. If an AI is reading all of your letters first and then determining that these are the ones that require a human eye, whereas these I can handle these myself. So why write a letter in that situation where an AI can handle it? So the shift that is likely to happen, is already happening, is moving from that UI layer, pretending to be humans, to moving to a system layer where you're exchanging data, essentially like an API, but what's behind an API is an AI tool, right? It can give you evidence in a more structured format for an appeal rather than write a well-formatted professional letter, because it's faster. But that actually touches on, or gets us into that territory of, will a human be in loop in that situation? Will a human understand that electronic exchange between 2 agents, right? So we'll need some, wrapper around it to translate that to human language for exception handling, etc. But to me, it's pretty pointless that we're making AIs pretend to be humans in a lot of situations where it's not needed. Yeah, obviously agents are essentially pretend humans, but agents don't have to use human language. So that's the shift. That'll be fun.
In that context, like, how do you think kind of leaders in this space should measure the success of AI, right? Is it purely on the EBITDA impact of the process automation? Is it on, thinking about more meaningful measures like recovery rates, etc.? What are the kind of KPIs, or at least like things that should be top of mind for leaders in the space when they're thinking about success for AI here?
it may be applicable to other spaces too, but if you were to draw a KPI tree for revenue cycle or payment integrity, it can get pretty complex, but the two main branches would be accuracy and then throughput, right? Accuracy means how good is your technology with finding things that could be wrong correctly the first time, right? Things that could be wrong, how good are we at finding those? And the throughput part is once we found those, how good are we in resolving those, right? And traditionally, the finding, the accuracy part, it can happen in bulk. It can be more deterministic. At if something matches these criteria, it's wrong. Needs review. If something, you provide the same inputs, you get the same outputs, right? It could be more deterministic because you're handling with large volumes. You're trying to find patterns. You're finding things that look similar to each other that could all be wrong. Once you get to that the workflow part of recovery, right? That is where every claim could be different. That is why you didn't catch it earlier. That is the review that you want to happen later. Every case could be different. And with this difference is where I see that generative AI or large language models shine, right? Because they are very good at taking more nuanced input and giving more nuanced output, with one case at a time or for one scenario at a time. So the throughput is where generative AI can make a huge dent because it can behave like a human there, and it can behave or pretend to be human and recreate a human touch with the same level of, again, human touches are probabilistic also, right? You give a nurse the same claim today and the same claim, 3 months apart, they could write a very different big letter, right? And that is exactly how a generative AI behaves. So that is the part of the tree, of the KPI tree, that this type of AI tools can really move the needle on, because they're very good at taking a very nuanced input and saying that for all the things that you provided me, all the words that I've seen here, this is what I think should happen. And then, for the accuracy part too. Accuracy part, obviously, we've had predictive models for a long time that are getting, with reinforced learning, they get better and better. But because we have models on the back end of the process also, these models can interact with each other. They can provide feedback, but at a much faster pace than human feedback. So it can reinforce the learning that happens to those predictive models upstream. And then LLMs are also very good at data cleanliness or cleaning up data. Because if you see like all of these 10 formats, it's a date, right? That is something that would have taken us a long time, many rules, maybe 100 lines of rules to translate all different formats of dates into an MMDD YYYY. You can just tell an agent anything that looks like a date, translate it into this one line. That solves the problem. So it's also very good at, cleaning up data. So that part is also something that can affect accuracy. So accuracy is more a combination of predictive and generative. Throughput is more, very solid, significant impact potential from generative AI technologies. That's my take. There's obviously nuance to this, more things that you could do with either technology on either side, but I'm trying to paint like a big picture of, impact levels here.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much for the time. Thanks for sharing all your thoughts.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you, Daniel. I mean, we're running from one thing to another, and we often don't have pause to think about these things. So it's been fun for me to answer your questions too, and these are really important questions. So I've had a fun time chatting with you this morning.